Welcome back to another episode of Novelio. Today is Thursday, May 20th, 2021. I'm going to continue on with my reading of Hot Winter Sun by Jessica Russell. About a month after Robert's birth, a messenger had come with news that on the 14th of June, the Royalist army was soundly defeated in a battle at Naseby. Oliver Cromwell and Sir Thomas Fairfax led the Parliamentarian army, while the Royalist troops were guided by the Prince. Further news revealed that on the 10th of July, the Cornish Royalist army had lost to the Parliamentarians in the Battle of Langport in Somerset. I am almost glad it takes so long to get news here in Cornwall, when it is news of this nature. This is the end, Julian said. The King's army will never recover. It is only a matter of time now. What will happen, Julian? Asked Catherine. We must begin sending money and valuables across the sea to France. There are 2 families, relations of our mother, who have homes we can use. I hope the Roundheads will not destroy the manor, but we must be prepared at any moment to assume the role of Puritans. We must eventually start hiding away anything that proves us to be Royalists. A dreadful masquerade that may not be believed, but we have to be ready to try on short notice. I'm willing to stay a little longer to see if some miracle will save the King's army, but I don't think it will happen in the end. Catherine looked around the home, fighting back tears. And if they destroy it? Then they do. It is one of those events over which we have no control. All we can do, hope and pray for, is the best possible outcome. Catherine awoke with a start that night. It was dark, and a feeling of intense uneasiness had come to her. She put out her hand, but by then was fully awake and realized, of course, she was alone in the bed. She lit a candle, put on her nightrobe, and crept through the hall to the great staircase. She looked at the moonlight filtering onto the refractory table, and for a moment it was blocked by a darker shadow. Someone was in the home. She crept down the stairs as quickly and silently as she could, and almost ran to the heavy door, which was unbolted. As she made her way into the courtyard, she saw movement near the ivy-covered door, the one through which she had come with Robert on that long-ago night. Knowing she would never make it to the door and see far enough into the darkness to make out the figure, she sighed and turned back to the house. As she made her way to the staircase, someone suddenly appeared and took her by the shoulders. Startled, she screamed in fear. "Kathy! It's Julian!" She went into his arms, and struggling to catch her breath and spilling out the story of someone creeping about the house. "It must have been my father. I don't know what to do," she cried. What you must do is calm down. Nothing can hurt you here. Mayhap it was just a dream." "It was no dream. He was here. I heard something, and I came down here, and the door was not bolted. I went all the way to the courtyard and saw movement by the ivy-covered door. I know it was him. Who else could it have been? That was foolish. You should not leave the manor alone, especially in the middle of the night." She turned and looked about the room as if desperate. "I don't know what I shall do if it was him. What if I was better off in France? Catherine, why are you convinced this man has the power of God?" Julian practically shouted in frustration. Perhaps because he can unbolt doors from the outside," Catherine answered with sarcasm. He was amused, as always, with her sharp tongue, but he couldn't pause to be entertained when he knew she was not thinking rationally. "If the door was unbolted, then the servants are to blame, and believe me, I will speak to every one about it in the morning, but it still does not mean your father was here." "You mean when I saw the unbolted door, I imagined everything else?" Catherine asked stoically. "Of course, that's not what I mean," Julian began as Carintha walked into the hall. He explained to her what happened. "Carintha, I was in the library and I didn't hear anything at all," said Carintha. "How is it possible that you heard a noise from the second floor that I did not hear? Are you absolutely certain it was not a dream?" "You all want me to think I'm insane," she cried angrily, in an unusual display of emotion whirled from the room. "Catherine, that's not what I meant," Carintha said, following her toward the staircase. "Maybe not, but you think my mind plays tricks on me from being so long in my father's oppressive household?" Catherine retorted, correctly guessing what was in the other person's mind as always. "Well, I think sometimes when people have horrible experiences, they can get overwrought and imagine things? Yes, Catherine, I think it's possible." For a moment their eyes met, and it flashed through Catherine's mind that Carintha likely doubted far more than the possibility of her father's presence in the house. It wasn't Carintha's fault. She was probably thinking of Catherine's hysterical rant about turning into a medium to escape his threat, and ultimately decided she was beside herself due to a nightmare. Finally, she turned back to her room in frustration. "Carrie, I want to catch her before she gets too far. Will you please find Rook and tell him to keep an eye out for the rest of the night? Just in case. I would never forgive myself if—" "Of course," Carintha answered, and Julian left the room. He caught up to Catherine on the landing. "Wait, I want to talk to you," he said, and she stopped short and turned around. "Well, that's unfortunate, because I don't wish to speak to you. I need no one else to tell me I'm insane. I'll figure it out on my own, as no one seems inclined to listen to me." Just then Jennifer appeared at the top of the staircase. Catherine told her what she suspected, and Jennifer asked Julian what was to be done. "Julian thinks I have lost my mind," Catherine quickly retorted before he could answer. "I do not," he said firmly. "I'm just trying to determine what is happening. It makes no sense that Blake would come here knowing that I would likely do him a mischief, but more to the point, how would he gain access? How could he possibly know that on this particular night someone had forgotten to bolt the door? Why didn't the dogs bark and alert us?" "He's mad. You said so yourself," Catherine replied. "So why would logic guide him? Perhaps he's tried several times, taking his chances that at some point he would find the door unlocked, and you can silence dogs by dropping some meat in front of them." "She does make good points, Julian," Jennifer said. Julian had to admit to himself that it was possible, if not plausible, but could not think of anything to say. "Catherine, it may have just been a member of the staff wandering about to retrieve something that was left in the house, or a maid letting a villager in for a secret romantic encounter," Jennifer said, desperate to come up with something that would calm her sister-in-law. "He was here," Catherine replied flatly. "I don't care what you think." She pulled away, and this time no one attempted to follow her. When she was gone, Julian said, "I don't know what to think, Jennifer. I certainly do not believe she imagined the whole episode, but it just doesn't resonate that her father would attempt this kind of escapade. I'm more inclined to think it was a thief, or maybe one of the things you suggested." "I wish I knew what to do," Jennifer replied. "I suppose there is nothing," Julian said, "but if the door is left unbolted again, someone is going to incur my wrath. I can promise you that." There was constraint throughout the next day. Everyone was a bit absent-minded, and Catherine knew their thoughts were far away. Even at dinner, it seemed that both Carissa and Jennifer did not want to meet her eyes, for they feared they would betray their skepticism about her theory concerning her father. They believed, as did most of the household, that Blake was far more frightened of Julian than he let on, and therefore would not attempt such a trick. Julian was disturbed at the carelessness of the staff regarding the bolting of the door. He was not worried about Catherine's father, but he was worried about her. He could only imagine how it worked on a person's emotions to suffer abuse such as Catherine had from that fanatical man. Had she not even developed oddities in her personality due to what was inflicted on her growing up? He was thinking of her emotional restraint that many times bordered on stoicism, which he now knew came from years of warnings regarding any demonstration of feeling. Due to her mother's influence, she had still become a sweet and caring person, but he also saw the damage the man had done and despised him for that reason. He went to the library early that night to try to redirect his mind by reading, the latter of which he had only recently begun to do, now that the evenings were no longer filled with melancholy. However, he was soon distracted by a knock. To his surprise, Matthew stood before him when he opened the study door. "Well, come in, my friend. Are you not up a bit late tonight?" "Oh, but Master Julian, this is what I've always liked about you, that you never ask boring questions such as if my hands are clean or how I am getting on with my lessons. Being up past your bedtime is such another question. You are so much like Carissa." Julian exclaimed and laughed heartily. "And you're to call me simply Julian." "I am not like a girl," Matthew retorted indignantly. Julian smiled and said, No, of course not, little fellow. What I meant was your personality." At this, the child seemed placated. "You are quite outspoken and animated," Julian continued, "and do not hold anything back, similar to your younger sister." "I suppose I don't know what all that means, but since everyone likes Clarissa, it must be good. Everyone says Catherine and Christopher are the same, and they say that about me and Clarissa, but I have other things to talk about than that." "Well then, hadn't you better tell me what you've come to see me about?" Julian asked, hiding a smile. "It is about our sister Sabrina. They said, when Catherine ran away, you hired a detective to find her. Well, since she has now come back on her own, if the detective still needs a job, could he be asked to find Sabrina? Because I'm afraid we will never see her again. I asked Catherine, but Clarissa told me to stop asking because it makes Catherine cry sometimes when no one is looking." Julian stared at the boy, overwhelmed with emotion he didn't want to show the child, but did not hesitate to assure him it would be done. Immediately upon awakening in the morning, he sent for Ernest. "I have another job for you while you are trying to solve the mystery of this mischief with the letters and messages. Catherine has another sibling who lives in France. Her name is Sabrina. She's a bit younger than Catherine. I'm not sure by how much, and before Catherine's marriage, she herself eloped with a young merchant. More than likely it was to escape that terrible household, and I have no idea about the type of man he was or exactly where they went. The only thing I am definite about is that it was France. She has already lost touch with her brother, who is essentially a spy for the king's army. Therefore, I would like to reunite her at least with this other sister, as apparently the situation has her very sad. If I can get a bit more information, would you be willing to follow up on any leads to discover where the girl may be now? And if so, bring back a message, or even better, ask her to write her sister here. I don't want Catherine to feel indebted to me any more than she does already. So if it could be done without her knowing of my involvement, that would be ideal. But regardless, I would be most grateful and pay you well. You could do it when you take the next messages to my relatives in Versailles. Certainly, sir. If possible, get me a description of her and find out when they departed, as well as the young man's name and any other pertinent facts that are available. I assume they would have probably gone to Paris if the man was a merchant, but that may not be the case. Julian felt better after Ernest had left and prayed for his success in finding Sabrina. Catherine crying when nobody was looking? No, he could not abide that. Sarah, I didn't know you were out here. I didn't mean to startle you, Catherine said as she rounded a corner in the kitchen garden. It's fine. Indeed, I am glad to have crossed your path, Sarah replied. I wanted to talk to you anyway. Do you mind? No, of course not, Catherine said, and they sat down on one of the stone benches. You may have noticed that Stephen Godfrey has been showing me some attention, Sarah said, referring to a neighbor whom they saw from time to time at social gatherings. Sarah looked down demurely. Catherine had noticed no such thing, but continued to listen. I'm at a loss for words, Sarah went on. I don't know what the family will think. Nothing like this has ever happened to me before. I've been considering how to tell everyone. Tell everyone? Well, I have always wondered if I would ever be in need of a post, or if I would have to earn a living somewhere as a companion to a frightful old woman or scrub floors in an inn. But now, Sarah, that would never happen. Catherine interrupted. We all look upon you as having an important place in the household, and no one would ever think of turning you out, she went on, suddenly feeling the urge to avert Sarah from saying, What? But this is different. I will truly be one of you. I shall have my own home and my own servants. You mean you and Sir Godfrey? Yes, Stephen, she replied, and it did not escape Catherine's notice that she'd used his Christian name. You love him? Catherine asked tentatively. Yes, I love him, and he loves me. You look very happy, Catherine stammered, not knowing if she should probe further or assume that Sarah would not make such an extravagant mistake. However, it seemed extremely unlikely that Stephen Godfrey would have proposed to Sarah, as most marriages among Julian's peers were arranged. I'm so happy. It means so much, not just knowing that Stephen loves me, but well, being brought up as I had, I never thought something so wonderful could happen to me. It happened to you, though, which is why I knew you'd understand. Catherine wondered what she could possibly reply to this statement. After all, who was she to judge Sarah if a man with Sir Godfrey's title offered her marriage? Was it not exactly what had happened to Catherine? Yet she still could not suppress the feeling that all was not as it seemed. He has spoken to you, then? He has proposed? She asked delicately. He has shown me in 100 ways that he loves me. It was a turning point in my life. Being a love child as I was, I wondered if it would make a difference to him, although not many knew that I was born so. She looked at Catherine for what seemed like a long time, as if she were making up her mind about something, and then said slowly, I'm sure you were never told this fact, but I am actually Lord Justin's daughter. Alas, however, I was born on the wrong side of the blanket. Fortunately for Catherine, Sarah kept talking, saving her from responding. Funny they refer to us as love children when love is something we so often lack. Well, maybe I shouldn't have told you. I have always hated having this secret from you, though. I don't know what to say, Catherine finally stammered, wondering if she was indeed a half-sister to the twins and Jennifer. 'Tis a lot to comprehend, and perhaps I have been too blunt, Sarah replied. Oh, no, that is all right. Catherine forced a smile and finally could do nothing more than wish her happiness, and eventually the two women went their separate ways. Still stunned, Catherine was unsure if she should say anything to Richard and Jennifer or to Julian. However, in a few days' time the problem was solved for her when the family sat having brandy in the summer parlour. Jennifer was speaking about the odd way Sarah had been acting lately, for which Catherine knew the reason. She gives herself airs. I think sometimes she forgets her position, the usually quiet Carintha said at once. I think we are boring Catherine with this conversation, put in Richard, and Julian nodded. Catherine knew their intent was to avoid the subject of class, thinking that she may be sensitive to it. No, indeed you are not, for I confess to a great curiosity concerning a statement she made to me a few days ago, Catherine said. Would this have to do with my father? Asked Julian about hedging. Ah, I can see by your reaction that it does. The conversation that turned to the long ago way in which Sarah's mother was presented to the household. Catherine realized that the family apparently knew about Sarah's belief. Our father installed her mother, Rosen, in the household before Sarah was born, Jennifer said. He made her the head housekeeper and paid her an excellent salary to run the manor, at which she was very efficient, and upon her death that position and wages were Sarah's. It was merely the kind act of a good-hearted man, but in Sarah's mind it became far more. Perhaps she heard idle gossip in the village and drew conclusions that Rosen was brought here because she was our father's mistress. This was never the case. She also told me that Stephen Godfrey is in love with her and is planning to marry her. Could this be so? I fear she is setting herself for grave disappointment, said Julian. Sarah would not even listen to her own mother, who tried to tell her she was not related to us. The truth of the matter is that our father found Sarah's mother on the verge of taking her own life. How dreadful, said Catherine. She was in a terrible state and had dropped her cloak by the cliffs at Lilac Point. You remember, Catherine, you were stranded near there one time? Julian smiled. Yes, replied Catherine, trying to conceal her own smile. I remember well. Our father realized what she was about to do and saved her life. Upon questioning her, he discovered that the reason for her despair was the fact that she was carrying the child of a man who was already married and had a family. Apparently, she did not know this when the relationship was formed and only discovered it after she realized her condition. At this point, the man renounced her. She was brought into our household as a widow whose husband died at sea, and our father established her as a housekeeper after the birth of the child, who was obviously Sarah. We even rode and played games together, as Sarah was the only 2 years her junior. Of course, she did not have a formal coming out, nor was she given a dowry, but a secure place in the household was always taken for granted, and my father would never have turned her out for any reason. She then married a merchant named Ben Milford, but as you know, he died from ague, as did 2 other men that year. She's quite efficient at running the manor and uses her education well, but unfortunately, she has also built up this fantasy. But she will always have a home here? Asked Catherine, feeling suddenly sorry for Sarah. Certainly, said Julian. In fact, when Rosen died, she begged my father to promise that Sarah would always have a place. I wouldn't change that now. Her skills are beyond reproach, and she certainly requires very little supervision. But wasn't it rather cruel to allow her to be your companion and play with you, and then in social situations make it clear she didn't belong? Catherine asked. Robert and I discussed that frequently as we grew older, and I tend to agree with you, Julian said, but I know our father thought he was doing what was right. Situations like that can be very difficult. I suppose, said Jennifer, most people do what they think is best at the time. One can only hope the decision is good, but unfortunately one only discovers whether this is so after it is too late to undo it. His intentions were certainly noble. I doubt many people would condescend to help a woman in such a predicament. Unfortunately, that's true, said Richard, but why has Sarah deluded herself with this fallacy concerning Lord Justin when even her own mother denied it? My theory is that idle gossip took place at the time Rosen first came here, said Jennifer, and perhaps some believed that it was our father's way of introducing his illegitimate child into the household. Rosen tried many times to convince her she was wrong, as I'm sure she knew it would only lead to heartache in the future when the truth had to be faced. There is really no way of keeping rumors from starting when so many individuals are involved, said Julian. There's probably a double handful of versions circulating by now, and nothing to be gained by trying to follow them back to their sources. That's why I usually see no point in wasting time with gossip. If we always stopped to try to correct such nonsense, that's all we'd do with our lives. But now, looking back, maybe we should have done more to quell the rumor when we had the chance. Catherine looked at the others and finally said, I don't think she is ever going to face the truth. I think she is firmly convinced she's your sister and nothing will change that. She was that earnest about the whole thing? Jennifer asked. Yes, she was practically announcing her betrothal to me in the garden the other morning. She spoke about Sir Godfrey as if the matter were settled. However, I saw that he barely noticed her when he was here with his brother and sister yesterday. Godfrey has a bold, breezy manner with all women, Julian said, especially attractive ones, and Sarah is certainly that. He makes it seem as if they mean something special. Unfortunately, a few moments later, he doesn't remember what he said. Ah, the worst possible scenario for Sarah, said Jennifer. She takes everything so seriously, so much to heart, and never looks for anything solid to back up her fantasies. A man must merely smile or engage in a moment's idle conversation, and she believes he's in love. It may not be a bad idea if you spoke to Stephen about the matter, she said to Julian. Apparently she is really in love. Sarah would love anyone who took notice of her, Carissa said with a touch of scorn. A little while ago she was running after Ralph Middleton, as he apparently showed her a bit of attention in the stables one day. The Puritan? Exclaimed Catherine. The same, replied Carissa. I find it difficult to picture Sarah with a Puritan, said Catherine, although it appears as if she is one of those women who will conform to anything in order to feel important or desirable. Therein lies the problem, said Jennifer, but I cannot picture her with a Puritan either. Isn't it the Puritans who are still demanding the king call back Parliament? Asked Catherine. Yes, said Julian, and King Charles should have listened, but the war has changed everything. The other side of the argument is that if Parliament is primarily influenced by Puritans, we'll have more to worry about than excessive taxes. But sadly the Royalist army will never recover from those heavy losses at Naseby. The king had so long to stop making bad decisions, but this he failed to do, apparently still not seeing how people viewed him. I believe he did see. He just didn't care, Catherine said. You're probably right, Julian replied. With regard to Sarah, however, I suppose I should speak to Godfrey and let him know that he's finally created a situation for himself with women who don't understand that nothing will ever come of his flirtations. Good, said Jennifer. The sooner the better. I do hope Sarah is not going to be badly hurt, Catherine added. She tossed and turned that night, unable to get Sarah off her mind. Then shortly after drifting off, she jolted awake, with the sensation that someone was near. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and sat still, straining for any sound. She had the feeling that someone beyond the room was listening, but convinced herself that too could be imagination. She thought about James Burrows, who sometimes did work on the first floor when the household was asleep, but it seemed odd that she would hear that from so far away. She silently slipped from the bed and, taking a candle, made her way down the staircase. As he did many times late at night, Julian was wandering through the manor, still brooding on the unsolved murder of his brother and wondering if Ernest was making any progress with the various issues he was working on. Suddenly he saw someone materialize out of the shadows and realized it was Catherine. Kathy, by God and all the saints, what are you doing here? His tone was abrupt, but his expression belied it. She looked at him for what seemed a long moment, and he waited silently for her answer. I don't know, she finally said, with a helpless lifting of her shoulders. She doesn't know? He repeated, rolling his eyes to the ceiling in irritation. Catherine, come to the winter parlor with me, he said suddenly. Now, in the middle of the night? She asked, as he grabbed her hand. Well, you are wandering around in the middle of the night, accomplishing nothing, save scaring me to death. I might as well put the time to good use. You? Scared? She said stoically, almost to herself. The devil could sit down to tea with you, and you wouldn't even move to the edge of your chair. At this, Julian laughed loudly. How you idolize me, Catherine. You think I know not the meaning of fear? When you came back ill and the doctor could not say if you would live, I felt fear, Cat, I promise you. Fear such as I never want to feel again. I don't believe you've ever known fear. Remember how you dealt with my father? You were not even threatened by him. Nay, nor will I ever be. He doesn't know how close he came to harm that day, coming here to try to take you away as if I would have let him. I hated him for scaring you like that. They arrived at the winter parlor. Here, sit by the fire. I want to ask you something." Then, as if his mind began to wander, he said, "Do you know I love this room now, Kathy? Every time I go through the courtyard at night or come here, I remember the day you came back to me, the happiest day of my life." "You are beside yourself," she said, smiling. "Perhaps," he smiled back. "You said you wanted to ask me something," Catherine said. "I worry about you. You seem on edge sometimes, as if you are anxious or fearful. Is it I who makes you so?" She was silent for what Julian thought was a very long time, and at length said, "I worry about Robert. I worry I may say or do something someday to, I don't know, offend you or make you angry, and if so, it would be in your power to bestow Briarwood on another." "You're worried about the boy's future? Of course you are," he sighed. "Oh, Kathy, if God granted me one wish, it would be to undo the wrong I've done where you are concerned. Such unnecessary pressure I've caused you to put on yourself. Briarwood is for your son, Robert's son, my own nephew, and all I have left of my brother. No one else will ever be put ahead of him. I only hope there is something here to inherit when the time comes," he added. "But if you ever got truly angry with me for something, though, you might change your mind, and then what would we do?" "Oh, heaven bless me," he exclaimed, then quickly said, "No, I won't be frustrated with you. I've brought this on myself. You think I have a cruel streak. I can see where you would think it, but it is exaggerated in your mind because of how I've behaved towards you. I am not a cold, unforgiving person, although I know it appeared that way at times, and concerning you there was not even anything to forgive. You must stop thinking I am so eager to seek revenge or withhold mercy. I suppose I am not fair to you, am I? You certainly had mercy on me when I needed it most. You have done so much for me and my child, yet still these fears creep into my mind. Sometimes I'm confused at my own feelings. You bring great command to every situation. You're never intimidated by anything and never back down. It's awe-inspiring at times, such as when I came back and you immediately made everything right for me. You even made the vicar come at once to baptize my son. You rescued me from being drowned and were not the least bit afraid during that dreadful escapade, and you certainly dealt with my father without a moment's hesitation. But then other times those same traits terrify me. Do I sound like a mad person? No, not at all. I think many things can create conflict in one's emotions. Perhaps I make too much of things." "Such as?" he asked, desperate to keep the conversation flowing. "Oh, just little things that maybe I make into more than they are. For instance, I was truly frightened when Sir Lambarth was harassing me the time and you handled him so aggressively, although I certainly didn't want to be left in his clutches. Nevertheless, it scared me when I thought you were going to do him serious injury, and perhaps I thought too much about the thief who was made to leave Briarwood." "What thief was this?" Julian frowned. "A poacher, I think. Anyway, he got his living here, and he was caught stealing a pheasant. You banished him." "Who told you about him?" "Never mind. I know who. Lizette." Julian cried with exasperation. As usual, she tells only part of the story and twists it to her advantage. I know she does not want you to like or admire me because she wants me for herself, and she sees you as competition, which you are, although perhaps competition is not accurate, as that interferes there is a true contest. Women such as her never appealed to me before I knew a woman like you. Now with you, for comparison, they all seem shallow and frivolous, particularly her. Anyway, I digress. The thief I banished from Briarwood had been warned 3 times about poaching and stealing him because he had a wife. I gave him a chance after chance. However, you must see that such behavior cannot be tolerated indefinitely, or the estate would end up in mayhem, with anyone taking whatever he wanted and breaking any rule as he saw fit. Martin Jeffers made a fine living here. It's just that he chose to gamble and drink his earnings away, and I had no way to make them up. The 4th time he was caught poaching, I dismissed him. Never would I banish someone or take their living away for one offense, or even more than one. But his case was different. He had to go. He would never have changed. You don't really blame me for that." "Oh, Julian, I've walked right into her trap, haven't I?" Julian laughed and told her to forget it. It takes knowing Lizette for a while to learn her manipulative ways, and even then it is not always easy to determine if she's lying. She is insanely jealous of you, however, this I know. As far as Damien Lambarth, I'm afraid incidents such as those will always bring out the worst in me. I can't promise to act any differently in the future should I come upon a similar scene, especially in my own home. You mustn't hold that against me either, though, love, I cannot make excuses for such cowards. Robert would have probably reacted the same way or worse, as you were his wife, but you would not let me tell him. Julian smiled slightly, remembering her plea that night. No, and you kept your word. I always admired you for that, even when I felt less than admiration for you most of the time. At this they both laughed and were both glad they could do so. Why did you ask me that night about whether I was angry that it happened to you, or merely because it happened under my roof? Julian asked suddenly. I wanted to know if you were just doing your duty, or if you really cared enough about me to be that incensed, she said honestly, and the thought that it mattered to her back then intrigued him. Of course I cared. I never should have allowed the whole thing to get off to such a bad start. Maybe, but I am sure that you said nothing to me that the entire family had not been thinking. They just follow the rules of etiquette more closely than you. Well, no one can excuse me of not speaking my mind, Julian agreed ruefully. Catherine smiled, and then something flickered in her eyes for only a moment and was gone. That cursed mask, it never lifts for more than an instant. He studied her face in the firelight, and then instinctively reached out to gather her in his arms, wondering if he would get away with such a brazen move. But she did not stop him. Don't ever be afraid of me, Catherine. I so cherish you. If you only knew how much. I will always keep you from harm. What I believe is that sometimes you do not look at circumstances, but rather at the behavior of those around you. All you could think of that night with Damien was violence, and you didn't want to see it regardless of the cause. Am I right? Very right, she conceded. When you consider the circumstances, my reaction was quite commonplace, but I believe it took you right back to those days in your father's home. Catherine nodded her acquiescence, and thinking erroneously that I would banish a person for one mistake or a momentary lapse in judgment, says to you, this person has no mercy. Should I make one mistake, he would be finished with me as well. Am I right, sweetheart? You always are these days, Julian, she said, and then looked away. Do these aberrations make me less in your eyes? Not in the slightest, love. It will sort itself out now that you are living a normal life in a proper household, and I believe we have been lucky in this family. It has been harmonious overall. No great conflicts like you see in some homes, and no ill will among any of us. Only perhaps Carrie's insistence on fading to the background as if she is unworthy. But at 21 she is young yet. These resentments may fall away, and I think they might already be doing so. Something is probably due to Harold Montgomery's attention of her. If you want to know the truth, I'm kind of hoping for a match there. Jennifer and I have talked about that several times as well, Catherine said with a smile. I suppose we shall have to wait and see. The least it should be interesting, he agreed. Would you really forgive me any mistake I made, Julian? Despite how many actions may make it appear otherwise, I have never been unmerciful. However, I think I would be far more likely in need your forgiveness than the other way around. Now you must stop this fearing from tonight on, Catherine. 'Tis unhealthy for you. Do you believe me? That Briarwood is for Robert, and he will never be displaced? Yes, she said simply. All right then. But you must not awaken tomorrow and forget. She pulled away to look at him, and he could think of no good reason to keep her from doing so. He sat back. I may wake to think it a dream, but I will not forget.